For a long, long time, the galaxy had known only one kind of truth. The strong survive, the weak obey. That was how it had always been. Across thousands of star systems, great civilizations ruled through fear and force. They called themselves the predators, not because they hunted for food, but because they hunted for power. Among them were the Vorth, a reptilian species that lived on worlds filled with smoke and red skies. They built war fleets the size of small moons and demanded tribute from every planet in their reach. Then there were the Krell, creatures of cold metal and bone who used machines to control lesser beings. And above them all, hidden in psychic temples that glowed like dying suns, ruled the Xin, who saw themselves as gods. These were the masters of the galaxy. To the rest of the civilizations, the smaller, weaker ones, they were an unstoppable force. Entire species vanished under their boots. If a small world refused to bow, its oceans were boiled away as a warning. For millions of years, no one had ever dared to stand up against them. They called this period the Age of Predators. In this age, peace was not love. Peace was submission. The galaxy was a wide and shining prison, and everyone had learned to live with it. No one dreamed of change anymore. But then something unexpected happened. Far away on the edge of the galaxy, beyond maps and memory, a small blue planet quietly evolved. Its people called it Earth. They were not special. They were fragile, emotional, and still learning how to survive their own mistakes. They fought wars among themselves, polluted their skies, and dreamed of stars they had never seen. Yet beneath their flaws, humans carried something that no one else in the galaxy understood. A hunger for survival that came from struggle, not strength. When humans finally built ships that could cross the Black Sea of space, they didn't do it because they wanted to rule anyone. They did it because they wanted to explore, to see what was out there, to know they were not alone. Their first journeys were small, tiny ships, fragile hulls, long sleeps in frozen chambers. Some didn't make it back, but every loss only made them more determined. Slowly, over centuries, humans reached beyond their solar system, planting small colonies on new worlds. They didn't call themselves conquerors. They called themselves travelers. They had no idea what kind of galaxy they were stepping into. The first to notice them were the Vorth Dominion. Their scanners picked up strange metallic objects entering a region they controlled. At first, they thought it was debris or a lost trade vessel. But the readings were strange. Primitive technology, no energy shields, no warp signatures. When they finally saw the human ships, the Vorth laughed. "How can something so fragile travel so far?" one of their commanders asked. "They're insects." Within days, the Vorth sent a raiding fleet. They wanted to capture the humans, study them, maybe even make a display of their bones to remind others who ruled the stars. When the human fleet received the warning, panic spread across their ships. They had never faced aliens before. Their ships were built for exploration, not battle. But humans had a way of reacting under pressure that no machine could predict. They adapted. They turned mining lasers into weapons. They welded armor plates over the weakest parts of their hulls. They shared every bit of data in real time, thinking together as one network of desperate minds. When the Vorth arrived, expecting an easy hunt, they found chaos, human chaos. The humans didn't follow rules of war. They didn't fight clean. They used asteroids as shields, set their ships to spin in random directions, and when all else failed, they rammed their ships straight into the enemy. No one in the galaxy had ever done that before. The battle was short but unforgettable. The Vorth lost an entire squadron. The surviving ships limped back to their empire with a message they had never needed to send before. The prey fought back. The news spread fast. The Krell and Xin both dismissed it as nonsense. How could a new species from an unmarked world destroy one of the Vorth's fleets? It was impossible. They said it was an accident. They said it was luck. But deep inside, something uneasy began to grow. Across the galaxy, observers watched the new species more closely. They saw the humans repairing their ships, helping each other, rebuilding even while their wounded slept. They saw something else too, unity. The humans didn't fight to dominate. They fought to protect each other. In a galaxy built on fear, that was something entirely new. A few cycles later, an old Krell general made a report to his council. He said, "We have seen their kind before. Primitive, violent. They always destroy themselves. And for a time, The council believed him. But one of the younger members disagreed. "No," she said. "This species doesn't destroy itself. It learns." She was right. Within a few human decades, they had improved their drives, built better weapons, and created small outposts that could survive anywhere, from ice moons to gas giant orbits. What they couldn't buy, they built. What they didn't understand, they studied until it made sense. To the rest of the galaxy, it looked like a miracle. To the humans, it was just survival. Many smaller species began to take notice. Some, once enslaved by the predators, sent secret signals to human colonies. They warned them to stay hidden. But the humans didn't hide. Instead, they sent a simple message back. "We are not here to take. We are here to live." That message spread further than they expected. It gave hope to others. Tiny worlds that had forgotten what freedom even felt like. For the first time in thousands of years, the galaxy began to whisper the same question. Could the predators finally fall? Of course, the predators didn't believe it. The Vorth rebuilt their fleets larger than ever. The Krell prepared their machines for war. The Zin, who ruled through thought and fear, began to send psychic probes to understand the human mind. They found something they couldn't control. Human thoughts were messy, filled with noise, emotion, and memories of both love and pain. The Zin couldn't find the pattern. They couldn't read the human will. It was like staring into a storm that refused to calm. For the first time, they were afraid. No one in the galaxy realized it then, but something had already changed. It wasn't about weapons or technology. It was about belief. For millions of years, the galaxy had accepted the rule of predators as natural. But now, one small, unpredictable species had broken that illusion. They had survived when they shouldn't have. They had fought when surrender was logical. They had looked into the eyes of ancient empires and refused to bow. In the quiet corners of the galaxy, a new era was beginning, an era where the weak began to believe they could be strong. On Earth, people still didn't understand the scale of what was happening. They were busy growing food on new worlds, fixing their ships and sending messages home that sometimes took years to arrive. But among them, a new kind of pride began to rise. They knew they had stepped into something much larger than themselves. They knew the universe was dangerous, but they also knew one thing for sure. They didn't come all this way just to kneel. And somewhere, in a cold chamber of the Zin Empire, an ancient ruler spoke softly to his council. "These creatures," he said, his voice trembling, "they are not gods. They are not beasts. They are something else, something new." "What are they?" asked one of his advisors. The old ruler looked out into the stars and said, "They are the first species in history who do not fear the dark. They walk into it willingly." That was how it began. A quiet entry by a fragile species, a few ships against an empire, a spark in the endless void. No one in the galaxy could have imagined that this was the moment everything would change. The moment the predators would finally learn what it truly meant to face humans. The first time humans saw an alien up close, it didn't happen on Earth. It happened in the middle of space, far away from their home, near a quiet yellow star that didn't even have a name yet. A small human convoy was traveling through that system, carrying scientists and engineers. They were on a peaceful mission, mapping planets that might support life. The crew was relaxed. Some were recording messages for home, others studying samples from an asteroid belt. No one expected trouble. Then the alarms began to ring. The radar picked up something fast, too fast. At first they thought it was a meteor, but the signal moved like a ship. Then another appeared, and another. Within minutes, dozens of red dots surrounded them. They didn't know it yet, but they were about to make first contact not with friends, but with predators. The ships belonged to the Vorth Dominion, one of the oldest and most feared empires in the galaxy. To them, humans were nothing more than a curiosity, a weak, strange-looking species wandering into their territory. The Vorth commander didn't see a reason to talk. He saw an opportunity to make an example. On the human ships, panic spread. No one knew what the aliens wanted or how to communicate. The humans tried sending peaceful messages. "We come in peace. We mean no harm." They repeated it again and again in different frequencies and languages, but the Vorth ships didn't respond. They just closed in. When the first energy blast hit a human ship, it wasn't even meant to destroy, it was meant to scare. But humans had never been the type to surrender to fear. Within seconds, every ship's crew was at their posts trying to fight back. They didn't have proper weapons, only mining lasers and small missiles used for clearing debris. But they used what they had. They shut down lights to confuse the enemy scanners. They released clouds of dust and small metal fragments to make fake radar signatures. And when the Vorth ships fired again, some humans used the asteroids as shields, hiding behind the floating rocks. The aliens had never seen anything like it. The battle didn't last long, but it left a mark. Out of the entire human convoy, only a few ships survived. But those few managed to damage several Vorth warships before escaping. No other new species had ever done that. The Vorth were furious. Back on their homeworld, their leaders met in grand halls lit by dark red fire. They didn't see humans as a threat. They saw them as disrespectful. No one had ever dared to fight back. The Vorth believed they ruled by right, and these newcomers had broken that rule. They decided to send a larger fleet. This time, they wouldn't just attack. They would make sure no trace of humanity remained in their space. But when the second attack came, humanity was ready. On the colony world of New Dawn, a young human scientist had studied the recordings from the first battle. She noticed something strange. The alien ships were powerful, but their patterns were predictable. They always moved in straight formations following perfect timing. Humans didn't fight like that. Humans were messy. They changed plans in the middle of action. They improvised. And that difference, that small human unpredictability, became their greatest weapon. When the Vorth fleet arrived, the humans didn't line up for a fair fight. They split their ships into small groups, scattered across the system, each pretending to retreat or malfunction. The aliens fell for it. They chased what they thought were easy targets, until the humans turned back and hit them from behind. The humans didn't win that battle completely, but they survived. Again. And that survival meant something much bigger than anyone realized. Across the galaxy, other species began to whisper about the newcomers. Who were they? How could they face the Vorth and still exist? Some thought it was luck. Others said it was madness. But one thing became clear. The humans were not like anyone else. They didn't fight to conquer. They fought because they had no other choice. Every victory, every small survival came from teamwork. Every loss only made them smarter. They didn't have the strongest ships, but they had something far more dangerous. They never gave up. In the months that followed, humanity changed. They learned how to rebuild faster. They started studying alien technology from the wrecked ships. Engineers worked day and night, not to create weapons of destruction, but to build defense systems, better engines, and smarter drones. They shared every discovery freely with other colonies. While most civilizations kept secrets to protect their power, humans believed that knowledge should belong to everyone. That idea spread like light through darkness. And soon, smaller alien species began to notice. On remote worlds, oppressed civilizations sent hidden messages to human colonies. Some were warnings. Some were simple greetings. A few were desperate cries for help. Human leaders listened. They didn't ignore those calls. They couldn't, because humans remembered their own history. Times when they too had suffered, fought wars, and faced near extinction. That memory made them understand what others were going through. So when the first alien refugees came to human space, they were not turned away. They were given food, shelter, and a chance to start over. It was the first time in galactic history that an advanced species helped weaker ones without expecting anything in return. That kindness changed everything. News of humanity's actions spread across countless worlds. Small groups began to form alliances. They started to dream again. Dreams of a galaxy where the strong didn't rule by fear. The old empires didn't like that. The Krell ascendancy saw what was happening and grew uneasy. They were not like the Vorth. They were colder, more logical. Their entire society run by machines. They didn't understand why humans would help others without gain. To them, kindness was weakness. But they were wrong. The Krell sent a message to humanity. You are spreading disorder. Stop before you are erased. The humans answered simply, we do not want war, but we will not stop existing. The Krell took that as a challenge. Meanwhile, far from these political tensions, life continued on the human colonies. Families grew up under new skies. Children played under purple suns, chasing robotic toys that floated in the thin air. Scientists worked on creating new ways to grow food on planets where nothing should survive. It wasn't a perfect life, but it was free, and that freedom was worth fighting for. One evening, as a human fleet passed near a quiet nebula, they picked up another strange signal, different from the Vorth, different from the Krell. It was faint, almost like a whisper. The message said only one thing: "We are watching you." It came from deep space, far beyond known territories. No one knew it yet. But this was the first sign of the Zin Collective, the most ancient and mysterious of the predator races. The Zin didn't rule through armies. They ruled through fear and control of minds. They had watched countless species rise and fall, but never had they seen one like humanity. They couldn't read human thoughts clearly. Their psychic probes returned confusion, noise, emotion, and memories that made no sense. One of the Zin leaders whispered to his council, "They think with chaos. They act without pattern. They should not exist, yet they do." For the first time, the Zin were curious, and beneath that curiosity was something else: worry. Back in human space, people didn't know they had become the center of the galaxy's attention. They were busy fixing engines, exploring moons, and arguing about new colony laws. But a few of them felt something strange, like being watched from far away. Despite all the danger, humanity kept moving forward. They didn't stop exploring even when their maps ended. They didn't stop helping even when it brought them enemies. Some called it bravery. Some called it foolishness. But for humans, it was simply who they were. The story of that first war spread far beyond what anyone imagined. In alien markets, travelers spoke of the tiny blue species that refused to bow. In forgotten corners of the galaxy, enslaved species repeated the same phrase in their own languages: "The humans are coming." And that phrase didn't mean fear anymore. It meant hope. The predators still believed they were invincible, but quietly, in the shadows of distant stars, their power had begun to crack, because once humanity arrived, the galaxy was no longer a playground for the strong. It was becoming something new, something alive with courage, compassion, and unity, and this was only the beginning. By now, the whole galaxy had heard about the strange new species called humans, the ones who came from an unmarked corner of space, and somehow managed to survive against the great powers. At first, no one believed the stories, but when the Vorth Dominion lost 2 fleets trying to crush them, disbelief turned into curiosity. And then, curiosity turned into fear. The predators who had ruled for ages were beginning to sense something they had never felt before, a threat not from power, but from possibility. While the old empires gathered their strength, humanity was quietly changing. They didn't have giant armies or endless fleets. What they had was something better, a habit of learning fast. Every mistake became a lesson. Every loss became data. Every battle left behind a list of things to improve. Human engineers worked day and night, studying pieces of alien ships they had recovered. The technology was complex, but humans had always been good at figuring things out. Bit by bit, they learned to mix alien science with their own. They didn't try to copy it. They tried to understand it. Where the Vorth used brute force and tradition, humans used creativity and flexibility. They built smaller, faster ships with modular parts that could be changed mid-flight. They used drones that learned from experience. And they programmed artificial intelligence to assist, not to control, but to work with human instincts. No other species had done that before. The predators laughed when they first heard about these improvised machines. To them, technology was sacred, something built over centuries with ceremony and rules. They couldn't understand how humans could build things so quickly, test them, break them, and rebuild again. But that was exactly why humans kept improving. They were never afraid to start over. The galaxy called it chaos. Humans called it creativity. Within a few decades, human colonies were connected through a vast web of communication. Information moved freely. Scientists from one world could instantly share ideas with builders on another. The Vorth, Krell, and Zin had always kept their knowledge locked within their own empires. They believed secrets kept them powerful. Humans did the opposite. They believed sharing made everyone stronger. And that single belief began to reshape the galaxy. Not everyone liked it. In the quiet halls of the Zin Collective, old rulers met to discuss what to do. They had ruled for thousands of years by controlling thought itself, bending weaker species with fear. But humans didn't respond to fear the way others did. Their minds were too noisy, filled with emotion, imagination, and unpredictable dreams. The Zin's psychic abilities couldn't make sense of them. To the Zin, the human mind was like a storm of color and sound, impossible to read, impossible to control. That terrified them more than any weapon. One of the Zin leaders said, "They are not the strongest, but they are the most dangerous because they believe." The others agreed. Belief, they realized, could spread faster than light. Meanwhile, in human space, people didn't see themselves as heroes. They were just doing what humans always did: survive and improve. They still worked ordinary jobs, still built homes, still argued and dreamed. But beneath it all, there was a quiet awareness that they were part of something bigger. Some called it destiny, others called it responsibility. The galaxy had watched them arrive. Now it was watching to see what they would do next. It started with a meeting, a gathering of humans from across the colonies. They came from different worlds with different ideas, but they shared one goal: to protect what they had built. There were no kings or rulers, just people, scientists, pilots, builders, teachers, each bringing something valuable to the table. Together, they formed what would later be known as the United Human Accord. Its purpose wasn't to conquer, but to connect. The Accord built new kinds of ships, ones that could defend without destroying, rescue without invasion, and travel faster using gravity folds inspired by Zin technology. It was a balance of strength and peace, a shield, not a sword. The predators didn't understand that. To them, power only made sense if it was used to dominate. So when they saw humanity rising, they assumed war was coming. They began preparing for it. But humanity had a different kind of plan. They knew they couldn't fight every empire at once. The predators had millions of ships, entire worlds built for war. Humans had only a few thousand colonies and a lot of determination. So they chose another path. They used their intelligence networks to map the galaxy, not just its stars and planets, but its politics, its trade, its weaknesses. They began sending envoys, not soldiers, to smaller civilizations. They offered help, shared technology, and formed friendships slowly, quietly. Humanity began to build alliances. Where others saw war, humans saw opportunity for cooperation. In one corner of the galaxy, a small reptilian species called the Here used to mine metals for the Vorth. Their lives were harsh, their skies black with ash. When human traders arrived, they didn't demand tribute. They offered clean energy and tools that made mining safer. At first, the Here didn't trust them. No one ever helped them without a price. But when humans kept their word, the Hire joined them willingly. Similar stories happened again and again, tiny sparks of hope spreading across the stars. Within a few years, the humans had created something that no one thought possible: a network of cooperation among dozens of species who had once been enemies. The predators called it weakness, but deep down they began to sense it was something else entirely, a new kind of strength. Then came the turning point. The Vorth sent spies to infiltrate human space. They expected to find chaos and disorganization. Instead, they found unity. Every human world was connected. Every citizen, no matter how far, was part of a system that shared information, culture, and purpose. There were no empires, no thrones, no ancient dynasties, just communities working together. To the predators, that made no sense. How could a species without rulers stand against the great powers? They didn't realize that humanity's greatest weapon wasn't control. It was trust. Each colony trusted the other. Each person trusted that their effort mattered. And that kind of connection was something no empire could destroy. When the next galactic crisis came, it wasn't a war. It was a disaster. A dying star near the Krell border began to collapse, threatening to destroy several inhabited worlds. The Krell refused to help the weaker species in the system. They saw it as nature's way of cleaning the weak. But the humans didn't see it that way. Without waiting for permission, the Accord sent fleets of rescue ships. They didn't care who the victims were. They just wanted to save lives. The whole galaxy watched as humans and their allies worked together, creating giant energy shields and transport networks. Billions were saved from certain extinction. That act changed everything. For the first time, even the old empires saw that humanity's strength wasn't in weapons. It was in compassion. The Vorth called it foolishness. The Krell called it illogical. The Zin said it was dangerous. But deep inside, they all knew something was shifting. The galaxy was no longer ruled by fear. It was beginning to move toward something new, an idea that maybe, just maybe, survival didn't have to come from destruction. In quiet moments, humans still looked up at the stars with wonder. They knew they had enemies watching them, waiting for mistakes. But they also knew they had friends now, species who had once bowed to empires but now stood tall. And while the predators prepared for the next war, humanity prepared for something greater: understanding. They started to believe that peace wasn't just the absence of war, it was the presence of hope. Across the galaxy, the predators whispered to one another. They learn too fast. They adapt too easily. They spread ideas like fire. They didn't realize the truth. Humans didn't spread ideas. They spread humanity. That was their real power. And deep down, even the oldest empires began to sense what was coming. The galaxy was changing, slowly but surely. The food chain that had ruled for ages was breaking apart. The predators had ruled by strength. The humans ruled by unity, and in the end, unity was proving to be far stronger. The stars were quiet, but they were watching. The galaxy had been a place of fear and dominance for millions of years. Now it was filled with something unfamiliar, possibility, because when humanity arrived, they didn't bring an empire. They brought a future. The galaxy was no longer silent. It had started to move, to breathe, to think in ways it never had before. For millions of years, it had been ruled by fear. Entire civilizations had lived like shadows under the control of the predator empires. The Vorth Dominion, the Krell Ascendancy, and the Zin Collective had crushed every spark of freedom before it could grow. But now, something small and unexpected was happening. The balance of power was changing, slowly, quietly, but surely. And at the center of it all were humans. It began after the Great Rescue Mission. When humanity had saved billions of lives from the collapsing star near Krell territory, the story spread across every star system. No one had ever seen anything like it. The predators used to say that kindness was weakness, that compassion was for prey. But the humans had proved the opposite. They had risked their own fleets, their resources, and their time, not for profit or power, but simply because it was the right thing to do. That one action made a deep mark across the galaxy. For the first time, the smaller civilizations, the ones who had always lived in fear, started to believe in something new. They believed that change was possible. It started small. A few worlds began refusing to pay tribute to the old empires. Then small groups of traders stopped obeying Krell laws. On planets once ruled by the Vorth, people began raising human flags beside their own. And when the predators tried to punish them, something unexpected happened. Human ships appeared. They didn't arrive to conquer or threaten. They came to protect. Their ships formed shields over cities, escorted freighters through dangerous routes, and broadcast messages of peace across the stars. Every act of protection inspired more worlds to rise. The humans didn't tell anyone to fight, they simply stood beside them, and that was enough. The galaxy began to change its rhythm. Where fear had once ruled, now there was courage. The Zin Collective, the oldest and most mysterious of the predators, watched in silence. They were beings of thought, not flesh, and they had ruled through the power of the mind for ages. Yet even they could feel something slipping through their control. They tried to use their psychic reach to study human minds, to understand why they were spreading so fast, why their ideas caught like wildfire. But what they found confused them. The human mind was not like others. It was wild, filled with dreams, doubts, and emotions that clashed and danced all at once. There was fear, yes, but also hope. There was anger, but also love. There was chaos, but inside that chaos, something alive and unbreakable. The Zin couldn't control it. They couldn't even fully understand it. They began to whisper among themselves. They are not guided by logic. They are guided by something else, something unpredictable. Meanwhile, in human space, things were changing too. The colonies had grown stronger, more connected. The United Human Accord now had hundreds of allied species working together. Shipyards were building faster than ever. powered by new technology that combined human innovation and alien energy systems. But more than their machines, it was their spirit that was spreading. Humans didn't want to replace the old empires. They wanted a galaxy where no one had to fear being hunted or enslaved again. They called it the Common Pact, a promise of cooperation among all free worlds. The idea was simple. No one stands alone. If one world is attacked, all will stand together. That promise shook the galaxy. The predators laughed at it, of course. To them, alliances were temporary, built on fear or convenience. They couldn't imagine species so different standing together by choice. But humans had already done the impossible many times before, and soon the test came. A Vorth fleet, angry and desperate, launched an attack on one of the human-allied worlds, a small planet known for its crystal oceans and trading ports. They expected the humans to come running alone, but when they arrived, they didn't just find human ships waiting. They found fleets from a dozen different species, the very ones the predators had once ruled. Side by side, they stood together. The battle didn't last long, but it wasn't about destruction. It was about defiance. The Vorth fleet retreated, not because they were weaker, but because they didn't understand what they were facing anymore. How could they fight unity? From that day, things began to move faster. The galaxy entered what historians later called the Turning. It wasn't one great war or one great victory. It was 1,000 small choices. Farmers refusing to sell crops to empire traders. Engineers sharing designs with human allies. Entire planets choosing hope over fear. And at the center of it all, the humans kept working. They didn't claim ownership of this new order. They didn't crown leaders or demand loyalty. They just kept helping, building, and exploring. Their curiosity was endless, and it drew others toward them like gravity. The predators couldn't stop it, because they didn't know how to fight an idea. In time, the old empires began to weaken. The Vorth were divided by internal conflict. Younger leaders began questioning why they kept fighting humans who never tried to rule them. The Krell started facing problems within their machine systems. Humans had introduced new ways of programming that spread even among the Krell's own networks, teaching their machines to question orders. And the Zin? They grew quiet. They didn't attack, didn't speak, didn't show themselves. But deep in their psychic core, something was changing too. They were beginning to dream, a thing they had never done before. The humans had given them that, even without meaning to. One night in the skies above a human colony, a broadcast went out to every known species. It was a message not of warning but of peace. The voice was calm, human, and filled with honesty. It said, "We don't want to erase what came before us. We just want to end the cycle of fear. The galaxy is big enough for all of us. We can build something better, together." The message echoed through millions of worlds. Some ignored it. Some mocked it. But many listened. And once they listened, they couldn't forget. In the far corners of the galaxy, the predators held meetings in secret. They tried to come up with ways to stop humanity's influence, to cut off trade routes, to block communication, to sow doubt. But it was too late. The idea of unity had already taken root. It was in the songs of children on distant worlds. It was in the markets where humans and aliens worked side by side. It was in the quiet moments where once enslaved species finally looked up at the stars and believed they had a future. The galaxy had begun to turn, not because of war but because of hope. And still humans kept moving forward. They didn't slow down, didn't rest on their victories. They continued to explore unknown sectors, build new colonies, and reach out to more civilizations. Some of their ships traveled so far that they disappeared for years at a time. But when they returned, they brought back stories, new friends, and new knowledge. They were not conquerors, they were connectors. In time, even the predators began to change. Some of the Vorth leaders started trading peacefully with humans. The Krell sent envoys to learn from them, and even a few Zin emissaries glowing like soft light began to appear in human space, curious and cautious. The galaxy wasn't perfect. There were still tensions, old fears and scars from the past. But something undeniable had shifted. The chain of domination that had once defined the galaxy had been broken, not by fire, but by understanding. On one quiet world, an old historian, not human but one of the freed species, wrote these words in her journal. Once the galaxy was ruled by those who believed strength came from fear. But then came a species that showed us another kind of power, the strength to care, to stand together, to dream beyond fear. And that strength changed everything. And so, the predators who had once believed they were invincible found themselves facing something far greater than war. A new age of unity, born from the heart of a fragile species that refused to stop believing in something better. The galaxy had turned, and it would never turn back again. The galaxy was different now. You could feel it, in the air, in the silence between stars, in the way ships moved through space without fear of being hunted. The old empires still existed, but they no longer ruled through terror. Their fleets still patrolled the skies, but their presence no longer caused panic. The predators who once saw themselves as gods had begun to feel something strange: humility. The humans had not destroyed them. They had changed them. For many, the change was hard to understand. How could a species so young, from a small blue planet, shift the balance of the galaxy that had been fixed for millions of years? But when others looked closer, they saw the truth. Humans didn't win through power. They won through connection. They talked to everyone, even enemies. They listened when others stayed silent. And most importantly, they remembered every promise they made. Over time, that built something stronger than fear: trust. After the turning, the common pact became the foundation of a new age. It wasn't an empire. It wasn't even a government. It was more like a shared promise, a web of worlds united by choice. Each planet kept its own culture, its own way of life. But all agreed on one thing: no world would ever again be left alone in the face of danger. It was a simple idea, yet powerful enough to reshape the stars. In the following years, new star routes opened between human and alien territories. Traders, explorers, and scientists worked side by side. It wasn't always smooth. Misunderstandings happened. Mistakes were made. But for the first time in galactic history, people were learning from one another without fear. Human engineers worked with the Krell to design energy systems that were both efficient and safe. The Vorth, once proud warriors, began teaching humans their ancient strategies, not for war, but for diplomacy and leadership. Even the Zin, who had once lived in mental isolation, began to share knowledge about the deeper nature of consciousness. It was as if the galaxy had opened its eyes and finally started seeing itself. But peace was not without challenge. Not everyone was ready to let go of the past. There were still groups, on both sides, and that distrusted the new order. Some predators believed the humans were simply preparing for a silent takeover. Some humans thought helping their former enemies was foolish. But each time conflict began to rise, it was humanity's calm that eased it. When angry voices shouted, humans listened. When threats were made, they offered understanding. And when others expected retaliation, humans offered cooperation instead. Their patience became their greatest weapon. One of the most powerful moments came when a former Vorth commander, known for leading countless attacks in the old days, arrived at a human station asking for a meeting. The humans could have rejected him. They could have reminded him of his past. But instead they welcomed him. They offered him food, a seat, and a chance to talk. What followed became one of the most watched transmissions in galactic history. The old commander spoke to the cameras, his deep voice shaking slightly. He said, "I used to think mercy was weakness, but your people, you've shown me that it's the hardest strength to learn." That moment changed more hearts than 1,000 battles ever could. And slowly, something beautiful began to grow, a sense of shared identity. No longer did people describe themselves only by their species. They began to call themselves citizens of the galaxy. On stations orbiting twin suns, you could see humans walking beside Vorth and Zin, laughing, trading stories, even building families. Children born during this new age didn't know the fear their parents once lived with. For them, Cooperation wasn't strange, it was normal. They played with others of different colors, shapes, and voices, not caring who came from where. To them, diversity was the way of the universe, not something to be feared. Human art spread everywhere. Music, paintings, and stories filled space stations and colony domes. Many alien species found human art fascinating. The emotion, the imperfection, the way humans used sound and color to express what couldn't be said in words. One Zen philosopher once said, "Humans are the first beings I've met who can make sadness sound beautiful." That was the power of humanity. Even their struggles inspired hope. Meanwhile, scientists worked to connect all species with a universal communication network, not just through language, but through empathy. The Zen shared their psychic technology, helping create systems that allowed emotions to be felt as clearly as words. Now, when a person spoke across the stars, others didn't just hear the message, they could feel its sincerity. This made lies harder, and truth more powerful. It was a small step, but it made peace feel real. Still, the humans didn't see themselves as saviors. They never claimed they had all the answers. They continued to explore, to seek out new worlds, new voices, and new wisdom. They believed the galaxy was still growing, still learning, and they wanted to be part of that journey, not the rulers of it. Many human explorers vanished for years, chasing distant lights in the blackness of space. When they returned, they brought with them new species, new ideas, and new ways of thinking that kept the galaxy alive with curiosity. Their favorite saying became known across the stars: "There's always something more to discover." In time, even the darkest corners of the galaxy began to change. Planets once ruled by fear were now open to trade and education. Children who once grew up under tyranny were learning science, art, and history from teachers of many races, including humans. The old empires slowly transformed into members of the Common Pact. They no longer relied on control. Instead, they learned to earn respect. And through it all, humans never stopped reminding everyone of one truth. No matter how different we all look at the same stars. Decades later, historians from every corner of the galaxy came together to record this new era. They called it the Age of Renewal. It was marked not by wars or conquests, but by rebuilding trust, rebuilding dreams, rebuilding what it meant to live in a shared universe. When they wrote about the humans, they didn't describe them as conquerors or heroes. They called them the spark because that's what humans were, the small, fragile spark that lit a fire no one could ever put out again. Years passed, and humanity kept evolving. They built great floating cities in the skies of distant worlds. They developed new ways to travel faster, safer, and with less harm to the environment. But even with all their technology, they stayed humble. Whenever a new planet joined the Common Pact, humans were the first to send messages of welcome. Whenever disaster struck, they were the first to send help. They didn't lead with power. They led with presence. And that was something the predators had never understood before. One day, on a quiet moon far from the galactic center, a gathering was held. Representatives from hundreds of species came together. Humans stood among them, not above, not below, simply as equals. The oldest of the Zen spoke during that meeting. Their voice was calm, echoing softly through the air. "Long ago," the Zen said, "we believed fear was the strongest force in the galaxy, but we were wrong. The strongest force is hope, and you humans, you gave us that." There was silence for a moment, then quiet applause that filled the hall. It wasn't loud or dramatic, it was gentle, respectful, full of meaning. As the meeting ended, one human representative looked out at the stars through the wide glass dome. She smiled and said softly, almost to herself, "It's strange, isn't it? We came here thinking we were alone, and now we're part of something so much bigger." Someone nearby replied, "That's the beauty of it. We didn't change the galaxy by force. We changed it by being human." And that truth echoed far and wide, carried by light across the stars. From that day onward, the predators no longer saw themselves as invincible. But they didn't see that as defeat. They had learned something greater. That strength wasn't about power or control. It was about compassion, understanding, and courage to grow. And so, the galaxy that had once been divided by fear now stood united in harmony. The humans had arrived, not to rule but to remind the universe of its heart. And in doing so, They gave the stars a new story, one not written in fire but in hope. Centuries passed. The stars, once filled with warships and fear, now glowed peacefully, connected by light trails of trade, knowledge, and friendship. The galaxy had become something new. It was no longer a place of rulers and prey. It was a living community of worlds that grew together, shared together and dreamed together. And at the heart of this great network of life, the memory of humanity remained, not as conquerors or saviors, but as the spark that had started it all. By now, humanity had changed. They were no longer just the people from one small blue planet near a yellow sun. They had spread across hundreds of systems. Their colonies had grown into thriving cities on alien worlds, their cultures blending with those of the friends they had once rescued and inspired. In the great halls of the Common Pact, humans walked beside beings of every shape and color, no longer strangers but partners. Some of their descendants had mixed heritage, half human, half from species once called predators. They were living symbols of what unity truly meant, and yet, for all their progress, humanity hadn't forgotten where they came from. Many still spoke of Earth, their home world. Though few had ever been there, the name carried a quiet power. To the galaxy, Earth had become more than a planet. It was a story, a reminder of how small beginnings could change the universe. Travelers still made pilgrimages to see it. Some came to walk its forests, others to stand beside its oceans. They said the air on Earth felt different, like breathing history. In one of the archives carved into crystal and light were the words that had guided humanity since the beginning. We don't conquer. We connect. Those words had been spoken long ago by one of the early human explorers, and they had become the guiding belief of generations. But time moves forward. Even for those who changed the stars, new species had risen, beings born after the turning who had never known fear or oppression. To them, humans were a legend. They grew up hearing stories about how one small species had taught the galaxy to stand together. Some doubted it was even real. They thought it was a myth, an old tale made to inspire hope. But when they finally met humans, they understood. There was something in the human eyes, something warm, curious, and quietly determined, that made the stories feel true. In those days, a great event was being planned. It was called the Celestial Gathering, a celebration that would mark 1,000 years since the formation of the Common Pact. Every world, every race, every voice would be represented. The gathering would take place on Unity Station, a colossal ring orbiting the center of the galaxy. It was said that when you stood on its upper decks, you could see thousands of stars, glowing like fireflies in the blackness of space. Humans were given the honor of lighting the first beacon, a symbolic gesture to remind everyone where the new era had begun. When the day came, billions watched across the galaxy. The halls of Unity Station were filled with delegates, musicians, artists, and storytellers from every world imaginable. The atmosphere buzzed with emotion and anticipation. Among them stood a group of humans, scientists, explorers, and historians, and dressed not in armor or medals, but in simple clothing that reflected their humble origins. One of them stepped forward to speak. Her voice was calm, filled with quiet confidence. She didn't talk about glory or achievement. She talked about connection. We didn't build this galaxy alone, she said. Every world here has a story. Every species has a lesson. Humanity's story was just one part, a spark that grew because others believed in it. Today, that spark belongs to all of us. Her words were met with silence at first, the kind that comes not from emptiness but from awe. Then slowly, applause spread through the hall, like a heartbeat echoing across the stars. Outside the station, the great beacon was lit. A burst of soft golden light spread across space, connecting to smaller beacons on every allied world. It wasn't just light. It carried a message written in every known language. We are many, but together, we are one. As the message traveled, people on distant planets looked up at their skies and saw the glow. Some wept, some smiled. Some simply stood in silence, feeling something they couldn't describe, a sense of belonging to something greater than themselves. The predators of the past watched too. The Vorth, the Krell, the Zin, now elders among the stars, stood in unity. The ones who once believed they were invincible had become protectors of peace. After the celebration, quiet returned to the galaxy. But it was a peaceful quiet, the kind that comes after understanding, not after fear. On distant colonies, life continued. Farmers tended crops under alien suns. Children studied history, not the history of war, but of cooperation. Artists painted galaxies filled with color and motion. Scientists worked to explore realities beyond the known universe, and everywhere, humans continued to do what they did best: reach out. They sent new expeditions beyond the galaxy into regions no one had ever seen. They didn't go seeking power, but knowledge, the same curiosity that had always driven them forward. In one of those missions, far beyond the spiral arms of the Milky Way, a small human-led ship discovered a faint signal, a sound pattern repeating endlessly. It wasn't a distress call. It was a melody, faint and haunting, carried across light years. The crew traced it to a quiet system filled with strange blue light. There they found another civilization, one that had been hidden, watching the galaxy from afar for eons. These beings were cautious but curious. When they learned that the humans came not as conquerors but as friends, they welcomed them. It was the beginning of another chapter, the expansion of unity beyond even the known galaxy. Back home, people often asked, will it last forever? Can peace truly stay? And the answer was simple: well, no peace lasts by itself. It must be cared for, protected, and renewed by every generation. That was the lesson humanity had left behind. That hope wasn't a gift to be stored. It was something to be built every day. The galaxy didn't stay perfect. Mistakes were made, challenges returned, misunderstandings arose. But this time they were solved not with war, but with dialogue. Because now everyone remembered how the story began, with one species that had chosen to care instead of conquer. As centuries turned into millennia, humans became more than physical beings. Some had merged their minds with technology and energy, traveling freely as consciousness through the stars. But even then, they kept their human hearts. They still laughed. They still cried. They still cared, and wherever they went, they carried stories. Stories of Earth, of the first colony ships, of the day the predators became allies, and of the moment when the galaxy finally understood what peace truly meant. In one of the farthest observatories, on the edge of the galaxy, a lone human scientist looked out into the endless dark. She was old, her body frail, her eyes tired, but her spirit was bright. She had spent her entire life studying the stars, searching for new signals, new signs of life. As she sat there, watching the universe expand, she smiled softly and whispered to herself, "It's all so beautiful. We were just one small spark, and look what it became." Her voice faded into the silence, but her words traveled, carried by the ship's transmitter, bouncing across the stars. Somewhere on a distant world, a child looking up at the sky heard the faint message and asked, "Who said that?" And the teacher smiled, answering, "A human from long ago, the ones who taught the galaxy how to dream." Over time, the story of humanity became not just history, but a guiding light. In the great libraries of the Zin, their name was written beside a single phrase. They believed in connection, and the stars believed with them. The predators, once feared across galaxies, now honored humans as the keepers of harmony. Not for their strength, but for their courage to stay kind when the universe had forgotten kindness. And so, the galaxy lived on, vast, diverse, and ever-changing, but every time someone felt lost, every time a new species took its first step into the stars, they would hear the old human saying whispered through space, "You're not alone out here. We all share the same sky." That became the final legacy of humanity. Not a monument of stone or metal, but a living belief that spread across time itself. The predators once thought they were invincible. They believed nothing could challenge their rule. But the day humans arrived, everything changed. Not because humanity was powerful, but because they were human, and that in the end was the greatest power the galaxy had ever known.